Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Spoon, titled They Want My Soul. So okay, here's one of the frustrating things about being a music critic, particularly if you cover indie music in any variety. Inevitably, you build up a list of indie rock bands that, for some reason, could have had that big mainstream breakout hit, should have had it, and yet never did. And on a certain level, it makes no sense. These bands might have had a pop sensibility, or ridiculously catchy sound and chorus, or even a sound that would fit perfectly into the mainstream, albeit with slightly weirder edge. And yet, they've never managed to get that big hit. It's mystifying. It's especially infuriating if you're a fan of power pop at all. A genre fitting in between rock and pop music with huge choruses and a ridiculous amount of real pop appeal, and yet they always seem to get caught up in the gap and they never really get the airplay that they deserve. And if you know indie rock whatsoever, one of the bands that tends to leap to the top of most of those lists is Spoon. The indie rock band that has accumulated a ton of critical acclaim over the past decade for several great albums, and yet have never really had that big mainstream breakout hit. It's more than a little bit frustrating because Spoon is a great melody-driven rock band with tons of guitar texture, ridiculously catchy choruses, and lyrics that are strikingly clever without ever really being flashy about it. If anything, that's probably the reason why Spoon never got that monster hit. They aren't exactly a flashy, garish band or one that's about to switch up their style or sell out in order to break. Instead, content to pump out great record after great record in order to appease their devoted fan base. From their early hard-edged albums reminiscent of the Pixies, to the understated punch of their early 2000s work, to their brief flirtation with something close to the mainstream in the mid-2000s. And yeah, you can count me among that group of fans of that particular band, with my favorite Spoon record probably being Girls Can Tell, with Kill the Moonlight as a very close second. But as for my least favorite Spoon record, okay, here's the thing about Transference, their 2010 release that did sour some of their newfound fans one after Ga 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 Ga. It's not a bad album, all exposed messy edges and minor chords and abrasive lyrics which could put some people off, but it's a sort of album where every imperfection is carefully calculated, which for me can resonate as a little bit off. I just prefer when those sort of rough edges come more organically. But after Transference, Spoon took another 4 years off, their longest break yet, and finally came back this year with their new album, They Want My Soul. How is it? Well, it's a Spoon record, for better or for worse. This isn't so much a band that makes dramatic leaps forward in style as it just tweaks little pieces to enhance their sound and their themes. Now the good thing about this is that if you're a fan of Spoon, you're inevitably going to like this album, as I did. But to the band's credit, it's probably one of their more accessible records, and I'd place it alongside some of their better albums. Not their best, but definitely close. Ironically, by going in the exact opposite instrumental direction as some of those greats. So okay, to explain this, let's talk about instrumentation and production. And look, if you know Spoon, you know exactly what you're gonna get here. Solid guitar-driven grooves, warm bass lines, drum progressions that tend to be more interesting than you would ever expect, the occasional fluttering keyboard line or strings arrangement or staccato blast of distortion punctuating everything. And the mixes will be very solid and polished, although this time around Spoon does bring a little bit more grit, which I definitely appreciated, and with some songs that always tend to end a little abruptly or feel defiantly small scale in comparison with sometimes the more expansive mix. Now where this album makes the biggest changes are in the mix balance. Namely that Spoon feels like a much bigger band sonically. Not so much brawny, but taking up more space across the rest of the mix. It also has some of Spoon's most synthetic elements in order to date, and most of them work extremely well. The ghostly ambient synths and distant percussion on Inside Out, the hollow whoosh of the beat on Knock 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 balanced against acoustic guitars, whistles, chaotic rushes, strings, and spiky buzzsaw distortion that came together really well, the echoing synths balanced against the Spanish guitar and hard-edged electric riff on Outlier, to the whirling rush of textured keyboards, xylophones, and wispy guitars on New York Kissin', which comes together just phenomenally strongly there. I really liked it. Now one of Spoon's greatest strengths as a band is that they've typically drawn from the pop music template well established from the 60s and the 70s for building their melodies, which gives their songs a lot of very firm foundation to build their compositions upon. But at the same time, it could also, when they strike to emulate that particular formula a little bit too closely, it can lead some songs to toe the edge of being pretty forgettable. The least interesting on this album being I Just Don't Understand, a cover of an old Anne Margaret song from 1961 that's done well on this album, I'll admit that, but at the same time, it doesn't really stand out for me. Now, fortunately, you can't say that the vocals don't stand out, which are characteristic Britt Daniel all the way through, and toe the line between being impressively earnest and being way too smart to be all that earnest, and he definitely knows it. And now it really helps that he throws himself and he throws his all into all of his material, and he's a good fit for the larger, more expansive sound and aesthetic of this album. I'm still not the biggest fan of his falsetto, but it's generally pretty restrained here, and it rarely becomes an issue. But you know what? You guys all know what you're here for, so let's cut to the meat of this matter, the lyrics and the themes of this record. Now, Spoon has always had a sharp eye for lyrical nuance, and it definitely comes through on this record, with themes established very early on and handled with their characteristic wit, self-awareness, and very real sincerity, which I'm very happy they held on to. Now, this time they're tackling themes of expectations, that we place upon relationships, on those who we think we have any sort of relationship, like, say, musical artists that we'd like to pretend that we relate to on some level. The album's title, They Want My Soul, in the title track, they're probably the most direct references to that connection that we presume we have. But that wished-for connection comes up on other places on this album as well. Do You, for example, is a song about a girl that he spots on the street coming outside of a bar, and he thinks he's got that brief moment of connection with, but he chooses to go back inside, and he does not approach her, with the question of the song pointed back inwards upon himself, upon his own rationale, why he didn't approach her, why he didn't choose to make it. Which is kind of funny, because the assumption is based upon that something will happen, not the actual reality that something might not have happened at all. These assumptions come up again on the reckless bad relationship of Knock Knock Knock, where the girl always returns after her expected world turns sour and doesn't prove to live up to her expectations, or the assumed too good to last relationship of Rainy Taxi, or the inevitable back and forth of Let Me Be Mine, where he says, if you want to stick with me, that's fine, but if you're going, just go. Make the ultimate choice there. Just do something. And that's before we get into the narratives that are a little bit more abstract, like the opening track, Rent I Pay, where the narrator feels that he's owed success and peace because he has gone as far as he has, and yet he still has to struggle because the world doesn't exactly work that way. Or Outlier, where the narrator sees a former cool friend who's with taste who, while it's never quite articulated, has become more normal over time, and he's somewhat disappointed by this. Now, all of these songs are based upon expectations and assumptions that are only really grounded in the narrator's current beliefs and his current place in the world at this time. And the album is aware of this, which becomes the only, because those internal beliefs become the only things on which he's anything close to secure. This is set in stone in the excellent ending closing track, New York Kiss, where he tries to recapture a moment of a relationship in the titular city, only to realize that that memory, it's long gone, it's only his at this point. And then the album does something very interesting with the final lyrics, a realization that he is that solitary connection to that memory, and you know what, he's just gonna hold on to it and live in it and enjoy it regardless, where that love actually had a place and that mattered to him, that even in that moment of love that's all his soul can recreate, that's the only thing he can hold on to, it's still special, it's still worth holding on to, and nothing can possibly take it away from him. So if that's what all defines what his soul is, he's gonna hold on to it. So look, you know what? I really do like this album. I like its assertions of individuality, its acknowledgments on how small those moments can be, and yet how important they still are. I like the richer instrumentation, the return to a rougher sound, and the fact that, you know what, despite it all, Spoon remains one of the most solid and consistently strong indie rock bands working today. I'm not gonna say that this album, that I love it, or that I find it all that intimately thrilling, but you know what, then again, Spoon has never tried to be that type of band, and their ability to add very real drama and stakes to situations that might appear to be small or more mundane to the outside listener has always given their material a lot of surprising humanity that really gripped me. So you know what, I'm gonna give this album a very light 8 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. Folks, Spoon brought some soul back with their most recent album, and from the looks of things, you're not gonna be taking it away from them anytime soon. So check this album out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a listen to, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen to. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.